Hello everyone. Today I am going to explain various software development lifecycle models which we can opt for any project implementation. So whenever we are starting with a project, we got to have some certain set of requirements and we cannot deploy any SDLC model to every project. So for basic SDLC phase, we are having these 5 phases. First is your requirement analysis, then we design the framework, then we implement it according to any programming language, then we test it and finally deploy to the customer's end, and finally the maintenance phase is there which will be running till the project retires. So to incorporate these phases, we have some styles, and there are 5 major styles which I am discussing here. The first one is waterfall model. This is the oldest methodology which we were using later back in 50 to 60 years back. So it was the first one. Later we are having a prototype model. Then we are having incremental model. And then spiral. And the last one which is the latest one, which we are known as agile methodology. It is also known as extreme programming. So I am writing is agile one, the agile model. So to start with any project, we have some factors which will be affecting for the choice of an appropriate SDLC model. The first one is requirement specification, whether the requirements which we are having are clear, are fixed, or they have to be changed over the period of time. The next is customer involvement, whether the customer will be involved throughout the SDLC phases or he will be just sitting at the end and we will be developing the final end product to him. The next is duration, the project is a small or moderate or the large. And the final, the expertise. Expertise means whether we are technically very capable to develop that particular technology stack project or not. So let's start with waterfall model. Waterfall model is nothing but the sequential phases. We just have to deploy these phases in a sequence. So sequence means if we are moving over to design, then we have to complete requirement analysis first, because we cannot move back, we cannot backtrack any of the phases. Once we will be starting with requirement analysis, it will be design, then implementation, the testing, the maintenance, and after that only we can come back to the requirement analysis, and that for one project we cannot move back. So this waterfall model, according to the factor, if we design, then requirement specification, then they have to be very much fixed, because there are no backtrack there. So fixed requirements. Then customer involvement will be nil, as we are not involving customer in any of the design, implementation or testing phase. He may be sitting here to discuss with us according to the requirement analysis phase and finalizing the SRS document. After that he will be having no involvement. So the customer involvement is nil, or we can say the there is very low involvement. The duration, we use waterfall model for smaller projects or those projects which we have implemented in past, so that we are having some experience over them. So duration is relatively small, and expertise, we have to have very high expertise for these projects, because we don't have any backtrack, and then we won't be having any you can say the customer involvement, so risk is almost has to be negligible. So expertise we require high. Then we move to prototype. As here the requirements are fixed, but every project cannot be like we are having stated and clear requirements in the starting only. So there are some chances where we have some dynamic requirements, or there may be a case where we are having some market survey and we are getting, okay, this project will be very beneficial for the society. So in those cases also we have to use prototype, because what are we doing here? We are implementing this whole SDLC but for smaller set of functionality. We are developing a beta version first and handing it over to the customer for some feedback. Whenever the customer's feedback will be again received by us, then we will be developing a full-fledged end product, and we will be deploying it to the customer as a final product. So prototype phase, we are having dynamic requirements, then customer involvement is very high, since we need him for every kind of feedback we need for the product. Then duration, we have small duration. That's why only we have to develop a smaller prototype first and handing it over to the customer. Next is expertise, we may not have very high. expertise. We may have moderate, since we are not sure enough so that this particular product will be finally implementing or not. We are just having some prototype which can be either thrown away, or we can use some evolutionary prototype and use it in the final product. So this is your prototype. For example, any human in computer interaction systems where the GUI is very important, the graphical user interface, and the feedback of customer is very important for us. So in those cases we use prototype model. The next is incremental. Incremental is where we have requirements fixed, they are fixed, but there is a very large set of requirements. So what we do, we categorize the requirements in some smaller subsets, and then we will be implementing those subsets one by one in the cycles, or we can say iterations. So this is all, we can also call it as iterative model. So in incremental model, the requirement specifications are fixed but very large. Since they are very large and we cannot start with the final set of requirements, that's why only we have to use some incremental model, and we will be developing first set of requirements which is very prior to us first. So this is fixed but large. Now next is customer involvement. It is relatively low, as we can opt for two options, whether we can develop first version and handing it over to the customer, or what we can do, for example, we are developing an ERP module and we are implementing the account module first. Then in first iteration we are having account module, then in second iteration we are having inventory module, and in third iteration we may have some customer profile and so on. So these modules we can either handing it over to the customer version by version, or we can finally hand it over to in the final system. So this is the incremental model. The customer involvement, it can be low, or if we are deploying the product in versions, then it can be high. Next is your duration. Since we are having a very large set of requirements, so the duration is also large. Next is expertise. We are having customer involvement in some of the phases. So the customer, the expertise according to the technology we require, it has to be high. These incremental models, we can use some ERP systems, as I said, and the examples, the prototype model, we can use some where we are having very interactive systems where the customer's perspective is very important for us. Next is our spiral model. There are certain projects where the risk assessment is very important. Risk assessment means if we cannot validate the final end product to the SRS which was developed in this requirement analysis phase. In spiral model projects, the risk these projects involve is very much high, so that we have to include a risk assessment phase in every of the phase of the SDLC. So what we do, we have requirement specification, they are fixed, but they are very critical also. For example, we are having some mission critical systems, or say aircraft maintenance systems, where every tiny requirement is very much important for us and we cannot neglect it. So customer involvement is also very high. We will be involving the customer in every phase. We will be having some spirals, and in every phase we will call some customers to analyze the system, to monitor the progress, and to finally provide the feedback. So the customer involvement is very high. Then the duration is also very large. Since these systems are no common systems, they are very critical systems and very large budget, cost, everything is very large for them. So the duration is of course the large, and the expertise is in fact very high. We require very high expertise for these spiral model projects, so that the risk should be as low as possible. The last one is agile model. Agile is the latest SDLC model which we are having here. What Agile does is to implement waterfall and incremental side by side. How? Say for example, we are having a project with 10 months duration. What we will do, we will classify the duration into 5 cycles, say 2 month cycles. There are 5 cycles to implement that particular functionality in 10 months. So there are 5 cycles. In every cycle we are having some set of functionality which has to be delivered at this particular time. So there is a Scrum Master in Agile model, the Scrum Master, and the sprints are there, which we call them as cycles. So in every sprint cycle, we have a Scrum Master, he will look after all the functionality which was targeted to be delivered in that particular sprint cycle. So the requirements are fixed. Customer involvement is moderate, and the duration is also high, and the expertise we require high. So we are implementing this particular 5 phases in cycles, and we will be delivering a set of requirement after every cycle. So this is Agile model, which we also call as extreme programming model. Scrum and sprints are the 2 main phases here. So this is the overview of these major 5 SDLC models, and according to these factors we can analyze, we can conduct a feasible study, in fact, to decide upon a most suitable approach for any of the projects. So waterfall, prototype, incremental or iterative, spiral and agile. So it was an overview of all the SDLC models which we are having. So thank you.